V.
Mark.
Postpod.
This is the post-pod. Post-pod. Sleeping Barber. Post-pod. We need a jingle. Make it memorable.
Yeah, totally. We do need, we
We
need
need
so
better-
many things.
We need better marketing for our podcast. Who could we talk to?
Good question. Very good question.
I don't know anybody.
Nah. There's got to be somebody out there on Fiverr.
Oh my goodness.
Brent.
Adamson.
Yeah,
Where do you start?
Well, first of all, he's super smart and super entertaining. And yeah, he was great. He's just so thoughtful about something that's so important. And I really appreciate his work.
Yeah, I agree. It was incredible. I love the way he approached a lot of our topics. We didn't really stick to our guide that we had, but it's okay because I think like the way the content's coming out is like super organic, and it's just naturally the thought process is that a lot of the stuff that he talks about naturally create as we, as marketers, we're constantly navigating this space. So that was very refreshing, very refreshing.
Yeah, just when we went off air, he's like, I'm polarizing. Either people love me or hate me or have a reaction to me anyway. And we're like, the cilantro of B2B sales and marketing. Yeah, he's good. It's funny. There's so many things in a lot of ways. His work kind of has been with me throughout my career. Cause when I was in sales, I read the Challenger sale and I got really into that and thought it was awesome. And then as I got more into marketing, and following some of the work with Gartner, particularly in the last year and a half, like it's a lot of his work there also kept popping up. And I'm literally like looking at these two names going, Brent Adamson on the Challenger sale, Brent Adamson at all these other publications. I'm like, is that the same guy? And it turns out it is.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's been really eye-opening to have him at the end there. We talked about it's a human experience. It's so funny to say that because it makes sense. And yet we get caught up in a lot of the tech, like looking for intent data, buyer signals, email campaigns, automation, all that kind of stuff. And you kind of lose track of what the important part of the whole thing is, which is helping the customers feel better about doing work with you.
I love where you started with this. It came back to this idea of like the tailored help that he brought up a few times in the interview. And I think as organizations, brands and whatnot, how are you focusing on how customers feel about themselves when they're engaging with your product or service and whatnot, but then providing that tailored help in that moment maybe becomes that distinctive asset, or sorry, not asset, the distinctiveness, or anything that you're trying to position. So I think it's interesting that at the end of the day, it's just about helping people solve a problem that they may have. And if you can do it in a way that's the most human or the most natural, you're likely going to win. Is there anything else that you really need to think about?
Yeah.
I don't know. Right.
Yeah.
And we talked about personalization as well. And I thought, again, that I hate sometimes broaching that project, that topic, because it's so vast.
Yeah.
But I think it's important in both B2B and B2C. What is that, how much is too much, and being aware that now it's too much, and what's not enough to kind of create like those, those unique experiences.
Yeah. There's a line between creepy and cool. Like there's, totally. And it's not very big. Like there's a stuff that's cool to be able to personalize from a marketing perspective that customers might also find cool. Yeah. Like that Huggies example where you put in your birth date and it shows you all the relevant products based on the age of the kid, that kind of thing. That's cool. But predicting and it quickly becomes something that could be very creepy and off-putting in a way that like I genuinely, more and more that I think about personalization, the more and more I think it's really not a great idea. Because like the Apple thing Like, I think to Brent's point too, like you can have a salesperson, and the salesperson, she could, be the greatest salesperson in the world, in part because she's personalizing her message to the individual people that she's talking to. But that's okay. She's like talking to individual people. On a marketing side, and if you're talking about like a product development side, you don't need to customize your product or your message to every single individual that exists on the planet,
No.
because that's not the point of it. Like, you're trying to solve a problem that's a problem for a large enough market that there's a big enough market to build a company around.
Right.
And so Apple is an example, like they built an iPhone or iWatch or whatever. Like, there's customization within that, but they're not they're not like customizing their product and their message for 8 billion people on the planet.
No.
It's, if anything, the exact opposite. They're
They're building for the
standardizing,
mass.
right? And the messaging is building for the mass, for the biggest,
Exactly.
like, clusters of people and the biggest issues that they have, or the biggest needs or the desires or whatever. Like, I,
Well,
I genuinely don't
I,
think of personalization as a good path forward from a marketing perspective.
I love where you're going with this because let's keep using Apple as an example, right? Apple could have taken out all the cool little features that their devices do, right?
Hmm.
And then retarget audiences based on those little things. I've never seen a remarketing or retargeting campaign from Apple that is isolated one key
Hmm.
feature because it's picked up my search behavior, my browsing behavior, all the website that I'm visiting that I may be looking for,
Hmm.
just this one thing. They're packaging it all up
Yeah.
in one device that now you can customize for it to become personal to you.
Yeah.
And I think that's the distinction there. Is
Yeah.
like making sure that you're driving the awareness of a product or service to the most amount of people as possible, but allow for the customizations or the personalizations to happen on the back end
Hmm.
for the user from the user themselves.
Sure.
And I think that is like the nuance. The only caveat here sometimes is yes, they will just kind of look at the camera and rarely prioritize the camera because that has become a thing that we likely use our phones mostly for now is like
Hmm.
capturing content. Um, but other than that, it's not
Hmm.
really narrowing down every little function and trying to find the right audiences to
Hmm.
target with that function.
Yeah. Yeah. Like, and similarly on the B2B side, I know NetSuite is an example of, on the ERP SaaS product side
Hmm.
of things. So they have, I think they're, as far as I can tell, one of the fastest growing. If you look at Google search trends
Yeah.
over time, like, it's one of the fastest growing ERP platforms out there,
Mm.
in part because they're super focused on the CFO and solving the CFO's problems.
Mm.
And so it's, that there are 5, 11, whatever, that I'm 16 and a half from Ryan and
Yeah.
the director of sales, decision makers, like, they're
That's
focusing
crazy.
on one person in the decision making unit, and and the needs that that person has from a financial point of view and financial
Yeah.
perspective, because a lot of the subsystems that an ERP plugs into would end up reporting up into finance one way or another. So they're
Right.
choosing to focus, and it's not even personalized to an individual. It's just like focus more than
Yeah.
anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah. 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 No, again, it's like they've been able to prioritize who their key messages around, and if like this is
Hmm.
the CFO helping him or her solve their problems and speaking their language, that's
Hmm.
going to go a long way in getting buy-in. I also wanted to spend a couple minutes just talking. I called it the 5 dimensions of alignment that he
Hmm.
that I scribbled down. So he talked about objectives, tactics, metrics, targets, and timeline.
Hmm.
And I thought that was a really I like your push there around like, well, isn't this just really aligning on strategy, which I think you're 100% correct on. Uh, but what were your thoughts, just kind of like thinking about those 5 things as being also a way to have stakeholder alignment? Like, do you do
Totally.
you do you see that?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, his other point about like all the different people and all the different decision makers, if you customize your message, you end up with less alignment and less
Yeah.
agreement and less sales. I think that's that those 5 metrics, or what do you call them? The value. I had just written value and then objectives, tactics,
He
metrics,
called it
targets,
value
time.
calculation, I
Right.
think.
Right. So the value, like calculating value.
Yeah.
So I do think that's important, to create that alignment. That was your question, right? How do you create alignment?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Kind of using those 5 buckets or
Yeah.
5 dimensions, as he called them.
Because if you can get a group of people, the decision maker group, aligned on the objectives, like why are you doing this?
Yeah.
What's the point of this to begin with? How's it
Yeah.
connecting to your overall strategy? The tactics, like what's the approach you're
How?
gonna take? What are the key metrics that are really important? What are the targets that you want to see come out of it? And then the timeline. If you have that up front, to me, that's like, okay, well, you're setting up a framework for success for the future, whether they go with you or not. I mean, that's
Yeah.
part of the sales process, but or the sales and marketing process. But at least you have that up front, so that then when you do actually land a customer, you have all those key metrics, and you know how to create more value for them after an implementation or whatever the
Yeah.
product is that they buy. And then you can also track the performance post implementation, where you go, okay, we have all this metrics, we knew what your objectives were, we knew what your targets and all that stuff was.
Hmm.
Now let's measure against all those things that we all talked about that were
Yeah.
important. So now you can then start measuring progress as a value, and helping them measure their return.
No, and I'm with you. And I think what I liked about this even more, it's you could almost argue, well, a client should have this preemptively ready for you
Yeah.
as you're preparing, because like I could see it both ways. It's a way that you can go in and kind of help provide service to say, hey, let's align on our objectives, our tactics, etc. But I
Yeah.
also think there's a great internal exercise here that
Yeah.
organizations should be doing at the same time to
Totally.
to create that, because then it will whittle down, like, hey, who potentially either your system integrator maybe, or what
Totally.
product you're looking for. Because if timeline's super important, it's got to be done in the next 6 months.
Yeah.
Well, it may help you in that filtering to say, well, what vendor can get us there quickly.
Totally. Like, I think for a company that's helping a customer or client or prospect through this process, it's also important for them to think about, where does this information go? Like,
Yeah.
I can have a conversation with you, V, and go, hey, okay, tell me about your objectives. What are the tactics you're going to use? What are the metrics, targets, timeline? We can have that conversation. But if it ends up just being a conversation and it's not recorded anywhere,
Yeah.
or, it's not being tracked anywhere,
Yep.
then it's just like lost in the wind somewhere. Then
Totally.
there's no value in talking about those things really in a meaningful way, because it's kind of like a bait and switch. Like, we're kind of talking about like this great offer and how we can help build confidence within your
Yeah.
organization and all that kind of stuff, but it was really just lipstick on a pig, and then I
Yeah.
really didn't care about it very much afterwards. So designing a system and designing a process around how do you help a customer achieve those things,
Mm-hmm.
I think can be
Mm-hmm.
really great in terms of like the sales and marketing alignment to helping, understand the process around how you set objectives if they don't have objectives, or
Right.
what kinds of tactics exist in that sense making component. And that's maybe where you can provide information, right? And like, what
Exactly.
kinds of metrics do companies like yours also look at? What kinds of things do they target? How do they set targets? What kinds of timelines are realistic? All that type of stuff. I think that can help a company differentiate by just creating a
Orient.
different,
Yeah.
um, or distinctive sales and marketing process to help a customer feel more confident.
You know, thinking about that Huggies example where you would just add, the birth date of your child, and then it would just automatically calculate in the behind, in the back end that, okay, now the child is probably like closer to 1. These are the kind of
Yeah.
products you would need. I could imagine even in a B2B setting, it's just like, you could say, well, what's the timeline that you want to have this implemented, and then you
Hmm.
use that as kind of like a drop down. And then all of a sudden it's like, okay, based on the information you provided us, here's like an approach that you can take, and you can kind of have 3
Hmm.
approaches and something like that. And then it can kind of give the buyer there in that context, like, hey, if I want to do this in 3 months, here's what company XYZ is offering that can help us get there.
Hmm.
Now you're solving a problem in that
Hmm.
moment. And I think that's where, if we can use some of those insights and some of that are coming from the B2C, and I know one of the questions we wanted to get to him was, we're starting to see the not the worlds merge, but the tactics really merge between what's been happening to B2C over the years and how B2B is evolving and changing.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's signals there that we can be using a lot
Totally.
differently to help with that process.
I agree. I think that was really interesting, that the comment he made about the travel industry.
Yeah. I
Like
wanted to
that's
talk about WestJet because of that, because yeah, we started leaning on them a lot more. But anyways,
Yeah, but it's an interesting analogy for a whole bunch of reasons. But for sure, there's a lot more content that exists today than ever before in history,
yeah.
and so you can easily, like, he's right about the widgets. Like, I went looking for this
Did you buy one?
well, no, because it doesn't work. They don't exist. So we have, V and I both have these Logitech Stream Cams, and I get a
Yeah.
new computer, and it doesn't have a USB-C port. But my Logitech Stream Cam has a USB-C end. And so I
Yeah.
was looking for a regular USB to USB-C adapter,
Yeah.
and they didn't exist. But I spent like an hour and a half just getting overwhelmed by all these choices. Anyway, but that's a real thing, and there's tons
It
and
is.
tons of content. And then I think you and I've talked about this before, but like, I was downloading a lot of stuff to try and understand the market, understand segmentations, understand, whatever better, like things our
Yeah.
customers are going through. And I get so many people calling me all the time, emailing me all the time. It was overwhelming. And I had no interest in like buying what they're selling.
Mm.
I just wanted the content to see if it was valuable.
Yeah.
So there's like an interpretation, when we were talking about intent a couple of weeks ago. There's
Yeah.
an interpretation of what I think you and of what we put out as a marketing group or a sales group,
Yeah.
and how we interpret the person's response. So that I give you an email doesn't mean I want to buy your stuff. You know what
Exactly.
I mean? And so like, misinterpreting the intent signals
Yeah.
is really easy to do.
Yeah. No, I agree. One final thing here that from my perspective. Well, actually, just two quick ones. So the stakeholders, the 5.4 to the 11 point whatever. I thought that
Yeah.
was interesting. It's true though. I don't know about your experience, but we seem to be getting a lot more stakeholders involved in a lot of these decisions. But I
Mm-hmm.
thought what was interesting was the question that he would pose on organizations and saying, what percentage of your leads actually generate revenue?
Mm-hmm.
And some decided not to, even guess, but it seemed like 3% was kind of like that number. What do you feel about that number, 3%? Like, I'd love to get a 3% conversion rate at times from my digital ads, but
Yeah.
I mean, 3%, does that sound true for you?
I'd have to look at the numbers again. It depends on the way you measure it too, right? So
Okay.
um, the number to me doesn't really mean anything, because it might just be the number. Like, that's just
Okay.
what it is. There's different sources of intent. Or sorry, each channel has its own sort of intent. What am I trying to say? There's an innate conversion rate based on the channel. So if you're trying to
Fair enough.
if you're objective, and this is what I think what he's talking about before, is like, if you're measured off of just getting MQLs, then you'll do things to get more MQLs in that line that you found of his, the MQL to SAL to
And
and
NP.
NMP, not my problem.
Amazing.
Yeah, so you can easily, like, this is a classic thing. I think I've said this before, but like, when I first started in sales, they're like, "Oh, we got our sales pipeline meeting today. Out for lunch with an older guy. He's like, grab a bunch of business cards from that fishbowl over there. You go to the free lunch thing, drop a business card, and he's grab a bunch of business cards because we got to go to the sales meeting today." So the idea was like, you bring in all these cards, and then you
Okay,
could
good.
say to the manager, like, "I have all these hot leads," right? Because all they really cared about at the one particular time was like, how many hot leads do you have in the beginning of your pipeline?
Yeah.
So it's that equivalent, right? Where you can get a whole bunch of leads, but if none of them convert into an SQL or a deal at some point, then it doesn't really matter. So, but each of the individual channels also is an indicator of a buyer's intent.
Mm-hmm.
So and this goes back to the Chris Walker one that we did like 2 years ago. Um, you can have an inbound lead. Somebody freely gives their information to you. Almost certainly that's going to close at a higher rate. All those leads that come from that source are going to close at a higher rate than somebody that downloads content,
Right.
or a lead that you, or like a list you buy from a third party vendor, because their intent is real,
Mm-hmm.
as
Mm-hmm.
opposed to just like having some kind of interest or being in a bucket of target customers.
Yeah.
So, I think there's a question around the value of metrics. Like, are
Mm-hmm.
you measuring for the right behavior, or are you just creating bad behavior because of the metrics that you've got set up?
Right. No, I'm with you. I'm with you.
Anyway, that was super fun to
It
have
was
him
great.
on. He was really entertaining.
Yeah,
And
Brent, thanks again if you're
wicked
listening.
smart. Yeah.
No, really, 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 really well done. Really well done.
Awesome. Okay, V.
On to the next one.
Yeah. Adieu.
Take care, buddy.
All right, man. Ciao.